And we're back with the show. Woo! And back with the Fantasy Football Pater Podcast. Woo! Once again, it is Gerald Glassford coming right back at you here. But it certainly wouldn't be a spooky Fantasy Football Pater Podcast without the Fantasy Football Guru. He is the main man at the Fantasy Football Pater Podcast Facebook group. You just sign up. It's that easy. And you'll get all the information that everybody's out there dishing out on the Facebook group in regards to waiver wire pickups, trades, a lot of things going on in who you need to pick up for your bye weeks, and so much more. Questions that are thrown out there, topics for the group. Plus, you get all the latest information on all of our episodes as well. It is my good friend, the man who is, I guess, got some scary scores this weekend to talk about. It is Mr. Tyler Baker. What's going on, my friend?
I'm doing well, buddy. How are you?
Trying to make sure that everybody out there has a safe and happy Halloween.
Yes, absolutely.
I'll tell you what, though, it is still a great time to be a football fan. We're just starting to get really into it now. Baseball is finito. It's done. And now it's just a lot of our attention now focuses on the NFL entirely. One less distraction out there. Things are going great right now for a lot of teams in the NFL. If you remember, if you're a Saints fan, if you're a Patriots fan, things are really looking good for you. If you're a Rams fan, but not quite a Packers fan, even though it was a home game again today in Los Angeles. If you got a chance to check that game out, this is crazy. This is crazy. It's more green than blue down there. But the Rams won anyway. The Rams won anyways this past weekend. So I asked my friend, there's a lot of things going on for fantasy owners. Again, another week is coming up upon us that people have to make a lot of adjustments and think about what they're going to do because another serious bye week is here in the NFL.
Yeah, well, there were definitely some interesting things that happened today. I I think probably the biggest one was Jameis Winston putting up those Nate Peterman numbers there in Cincinnati, getting benched, and wouldn't you know, just in time for Halloween, we get some Fitz magic. So
the Fitz magic is back.
The Fitz magic is back. Trick or treat, we don't know yet. But I don't think they bench Fitzpatrick going into next week. Jameis Winston just 4 picks. The last one was a pick 6. They finally yanked him. Fitzpatrick comes in 11 for 15, 194 yards and 2 touchdowns. Brings them right to the brink of coming back in that game, and Cincinnati kicks a last-second field goal. So, yeah, Fitzmagic is back. And you know what? I fought it for the early part of the season because we knew Winston was coming back. And we know what we have in Fitzpatrick. But now we really know what we have in Jameis Winston. And it is bad. Coming off of the bye week, he drops an absolute stinker, gets yanked. And then Fitzpatrick comes in. And he's the spark that team needs. And remember, this week, Deshaun Jackson was requesting a trade. Well, he had an okay to date. Now his touchdown did come from Winston, but what we definitely learned is that Ronald Jones II is not going to come in and take over this backfield. I thought maybe after the bye, they would kind of regroup and come out, but Peyton Barber was definitely the number 1 back here. So, hey, as far as Tampa Bay is concerned, they are they're not looking too good in the standings. But I'll tell you, the Fitzmagic is back.
Well, I want to ask you this, and this leads into a larger question here that I want to talk about when it comes to the future of the Tampa Bay Bucks. They'll probably be looking for a quarterback because Fitzpatrick is a little bit on the older side. Even if he is successful for the rest of the season, it's still something that they probably have to look at. I'm sure they're probably not thinking about Fitzpatrick as a long-term solution. Does this mean it's going to be the end of Jameis Winston in Tampa Bay for at least, unless unless there's an injury that happens? Do you see Jameis Winston actually getting the ball back as a starting quarterback in the Tampa Bay system, or do you see him having to go elsewhere and trying to resurrect his career somewhere else?
Yeah, as far as this season, you know what? The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to do on a week to week basis what they think that they need to do to win. And we've seen bad Fitzpatrick before. I mean,
Well, he only had one bad half. All it took was one bad half for him to get pulled because that was a very short lease, even
yes,
after the fact that he had
it
three
was.
straight 400-yard games, had his jersey sent to the Hall of Fame,
Yeah.
had one bad half, and out he went.
Well, but they were committed to Jameis Winston at the beginning of the season. Their future, at least from what we know, is in Jameis Winston. Maybe they need to just sit Winston on the bench, work on some things, maybe work on some things in practice. Keep in mind, he's still a young quarterback. Um, so as far as long term, I don't think that they're going to give up on Jameis Winston. In the short term, how do you bench Fitzmagic? I mean, I think if you take Fitzpatrick out of the starting lineup, you lose the locker room at this point, especially coming in and doing a pretty awesome comeback, even though they didn't win the game. He put them back into that game. How do you bench him? As far as looking long term, maybe if Dirk Cutter loses his job, then they just scrap the whole thing and start over again. I don't know, but how do you bench him? Well, and this is just the assumption of rational coaching, but you've already got a receiver asking for a trade, and now they have a spark at quarterback. How do you put him on the bench? I don't
And
think you can.
Deshaun Jackson actually loves to play with Ryan
Yeah,
Fitzpatrick. In fact, he was the one early on in the Fitzmagic era earlier
yeah,
this season that dressed him up with the
yeah.
beard and the clothes and all that. This might get him to want to stay for at least the rest of the season and going forward if he does have, because he does have that kinship with
Hmm.
Fitzpatrick.
Yeah.
What does that mean, though, in a larger detail for fantasy football owners? Should they start thinking about reclaiming
Mm.
Ryan Fitzpatrick again off the waiver wire? Because I know a lot of teams dumped him as
Yes.
soon as the fact that he became a
Which was a
backup.
good move. Which was absolutely a good move because, well, you and I talked about it. There was going to be a very short leash, and they gave him that short leash. Wait, Jameis Winston is their guy. Well, I'm sorry, Jameis Winston stunk it up today, and so now what I think you're going to see is you're going to see a leash on Fitzpatrick, but I think it's going to be a much longer leash. So as far as, going and picking them up, if you're hurting at quarterback, sure, because there are some weapons on that offense. We've already seen at the beginning of the season. He knows how to use those weapons on the offense. I think Fitzpatrick is a viable waiver wire option now.
And as someone who actually produced very well earlier in the season, people need to figure out if they need a quarterback because of the bye weeks. He now pops up into the fray along with what we were talking about on our Fantasy Football Pater podcast extra, which you can catch right now on the Pop Culture Cosmos channel on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, what have you. We had a lot of ideas on quarterbacks that you could pick up that should be or might be on the waiver wire. Definitely Ryan
Yeah.
Fitzpatrick should, he by all intents and purposes should be on your waiver wire, and you should be making that claim as soon as possible if you know you need a quarterback in the coming weeks because of the bye schedule.
Yeah, I think he's going to probably be the biggest waiver wire pickup this week. Sure.
So there were other great games this weekend in the NFL that affected a lot of fantasy football owners out there. I know you were targeting the Green Bay home game that they had extra in Los Angeles. There was also the great matchup between Minnesota and New Orleans. Tell me
Yes.
a little bit more about those games and what you were looking at if you're a fantasy football owner.
Well, we saw that the Rams have a good defense, which not a huge surprise. But when you can hold Aaron Rodgers under 300 yards and only one touchdown, that's a pretty good day for your defense. Green Bay fell a little short in this game, even though they had basically a home crowd, and even network commentators kept commenting about it. On LA side, you know what? Todd Gurley's going to do Todd Gurley stuff. 114 yards on the ground, 81 in the air, got a receiving touchdown. Kind of a fantasy surprise, Josh Reynolds. With Cooper Kupp being out, Josh Reynolds comes in, catches a couple touchdowns, which just continues the waters there between who you play, Cooks, Woods, Kupp, now Reynolds. I think Reynolds is fantasy relevant for as long as Cooper Kupp's out, and that's about it. But every week you're playing your Rams, you're playing your Packers. There was a Randall Cobb sighting today, so he's back in the mix there. 4 for 40, not super exciting, but still seeing a lot of work for Marquez Valdez-Scantling, which is the rookie out of their 3 rookies that they got in the draft, the rookie that's kind of presenting himself as a viable fantasy option. Geronimo Allison, back off of injury, kind of quiet in this game, and of course leading the way, Devontae Adams. He's so good. He and Rodgers are on the same page. 5 receptions, 133 yards. It was a really good game today in LA between the Packers and the Rams. And I think at some point in the playoffs, you're probably going to see these 2 teams meet. In New Orleans, Minnesota, you know what? That Saints defense, with the addition of Eli Apple, I think is going to help them to continue to improve. They held Minnesota to 20 points, earned a pick 6 off of Kirk Cousins. So now the Saints defense is still vulnerable through the air, but you're seeing them get a little bit better, which is kind of reminiscent of what they did 2 years ago. They started out as complete hot garbage and managed to, kind of work themselves into form a little bit. Minnesota, Adam Thielen, another 100-yard game. The dude's going to break the record for consecutive 100-yard games. They're going to give it to him. But I'm really looking forward to getting Dalvin Cook back. When Dalvin Cook gets back into this offense, I think it's a different type of game had he played today.
Once again, this is Tyler Baker from the Fantasy Football Pater podcast, along with me, Gerald Glassford. You got to check out our shows, the Fantasy Football Pater podcast. Each and every week we do them. That's going to be available on Podbean, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many other outlets on the Pop Culture Cosmos channel. My friend, did you get a chance to get wind of what was going on in Oakland, continuing the pain in the Gruden area, where you had some things went on when it looks like Oakland was putting out a nice game. Then something happened along the way in the fourth quarter that really started to get people interested long-term as far as some options for fantasy football owners out there when it comes to the Indianapolis Colts.
Well, you're going to have to clue me in because I haven't seen this game. I'm just looking at the stat line, and of course Marlon Mack. And we've talked about for this whole season just what a just a really murky situation that backfield is. Well, Marlon Mack is the running back now. You will see Naheem Hines come in and get some work in the passing game, but it's Marlon Mack's backfield, and they are using him, and he's performing pretty well. Jack Doyle, it was good to have him back. This is the first game he's played, I think, since week 1. 6 receptions, 70 yards, and a touchdown. But I wasn't really too familiar with this game. Tell me what's going on.
Well, what's going on is that Oakland seemed to control most of the game, had a nice lead set out for themselves. Everything was fine until heading into the fourth quarter when they gave up the last 21 points in the fourth quarter to get out. And unfortunately, the Gruden era continues.
Ooh.
On a bad note.
Brutal.
So, yeah.
That's brutal. That's like lose the locker room brutal. I mean...
And the thing is, they weren't really outgained by a whole lot. Yes, Marlon Mack had a great game, but overall, in the passing situation, they came to kind of like a stalemate between Andrew Luck and also Derek Carr, both throwing for 3 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. Nice games by both of them, but at some point in time, we have to realize that it's just not working in Oakland, and it doesn't look like it's going to be working anytime soon.
Yeah, I think Gruden's probably set his clock forward to the draft. I think that's
it looks like
what's happening.
Oh, it looks like he did. It looks like he did because anything he's doing now, yeah, he's checking out, and unfortunately, He doesn't really have a lot of options as far as the offense, his weapons. I mean, 250 yards almost for Derek Carr. I think that's the best you're going to get because the weapons that he has right now are really undervalued and underserved. That to the point where it's just really not going to scare any defenses. So I give credit to Derek Carr, even though he's had a really rough week with people thinking that he was the source of all the angst after the Amari Cooper trade and that the locker room didn't like him and whatnot. So it looks like that Derek Carr can still salvage a decent season for fantasy owners who have him on their roster. Tyler, are you there? Tyler, are you there?
Check,
Tyler, check. You there?
Yeah.
Okay. I lost you. I was like,
okay, sorry.
All right. Yeah, I was just talking about Derek Carr still being, he this could be the start of, after all the troubles he went through in the past week, him actually going and trying to put it into a positive going forward. And this could be a good sign for fantasy owners that might have him as a backup on their roster.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is an opportunity for him to work through adversity. And John Gruden has really dissected this team. And there was a report that came out in The Atlantic talking about, I think it was The Atlantic, that was talking about how the locker room was really upset with Gruden because he kept saying, oh, Amari's our guy, Amari's here to stay. And then without telling anybody on the team, they just shipped him off for a first round pick, and how some of the players just did not react well with that. There has been some rumblings about Derek Carr. So this is an opportunity with the I mean, when your number one, receiving threat is Jared Cook and Jalen Richard out of the backfield, you've got problems. I mean, but I mean, this is all John Gruden's doing. He decided he wanted to go out and get Jordy Nelson. He's decided that Martavius Bryant was worth talking up this week. Come on, give me a break. I mean, this season is a wash, and if Derek Carr can gut it out, then maybe he can earn the respect of his teammates. But as far as fantasy, there ain't no way I'm going near Derek Carr. You know what I mean, today's numbers 244 and 3 touchdowns for fantasy, you'll take it. But and his completion percentage, 75% of his passes. That's pretty good, but are you ever going to feel good about playing him? Maybe in some of these bye week situations. And I have no doubt that Derek Carr is available probably on a lot of waiver wires. So maybe if you're desperate, going and picking him up. But yeah, that Oakland team, it looks bad. But we did see a coaching change in Arizona this week. Remember, Byron Leftwich took over for Mike McCoy, who got fired, and Leftwich learned under Bruce Arians and said he was going to kind of get back to that. A little bit more production out of David Johnson. I think that's going to continue to increase as game scripts provide. But what we did see, the old man, Larry Fitzgerald, 12 targets, 8 receptions, 102 yards and a touchdown. It's so good to see Larry Fitzgerald back at the top of that pecking order there, and good things happened, and they ended up getting a win against San Francisco. So moving forward, whereas Larry Fitzgerald had been discarded on a lot of fantasy teams, if not to the waiver wire, definitely to the bench, I think moving forward, you've got to understand that there was a coaching change. They're getting back to what has worked with them in the past, and it looks like that's going to spell good things for Larry Fitzgerald.
Somebody else that is continually looking forward, somebody else that is continually looking good that we weren't expecting was in Pittsburgh with another outstanding performance from James Conner. And I'm telling you, my friend, even though Le'Veon Bell is still lurking around somewhere in Pittsburgh, supposedly going to check in at any point in time in the near future, at this point, can you ask yourself, do you really need him? And what is it going to take for Le'Veon Bell to get any time with this tremendous season that we've seen so far from James Conner?
Yeah, that's going to be a fantasy headache when he comes back. But I'll tell you, I have a lot of family members that are Steelers fans. I have a lot of friends that are Steelers fans, and there's a resounding Le'Veon who, like James Conner has been doing some really, really good things on the ground and in the passing game. I don't know a single Steelers fan that that is on the edge of their seat waiting for Le'Veon Bell to come back. No. And for fantasy purposes, it's going to be difficult when he comes back. How are they going to use him? I still think when he comes back, it's going to be a split. And for a couple of reasons. One, you need Bell to get back into football shape, and that no matter how good his conditioning, and he's a veteran, so his conditioning should be good, but no matter how conditioned he is, when you come back, you still have to have a game or two to kind of get back into, full speed football shape. So there's going to be probably 2 weeks of that. Then after that, I think it's still going to be a split though, because Connor is doing some really good things between the tackles. He's the future at running back there, so it's going to be a fantasy headache. It really is.
I am beginning to think something a little bit different. I think when
Mhm.
Le'Veon Bell comes back, I actually don't think he's going to get the ball very much at all, unless due
Really.
to injury or
Mhm.
situational purposes. I think that the whole team is now solidly behind James Conner.
Sure.
And while they'd be kind of happy to see Le'Veon Bell back, there's also a situation there where they could feel like he abandoned them, thought of
Mhm.
himself, was very selfish about it. I mean, that type of situation happens sometimes in these holdout situations. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm not saying that's not the case, but that could
Mhm.
happen, and it could lead to a lot of dissension if he gets a lot of playing time ahead of the very deserving James Conner.
Well, you said it. He's very deserving. He's deserving in that he has earned he's earned that role. It's not like Le'Veon's Bell, so we got to play this scrub. No, he's earned his spot as the future at the running back position there. And you know what? They're atop of the AFC North. In a couple weeks when Bell comes back, where are they going to be? But at the end of the day, every single team is going to do whatever they think is best to win football games. Le'Veon Bell is a better runner, especially in the open field, than James Conner is. Period. In the passing game, Le'Veon Bell is a better receiving back. So I think that they're going to have plays where they know Bell's athleticism is going to shine, and they're going to have some plays where they just want James Conner to go out and do what he's been doing and hit it hard up the middle. So I think it's going to be kind of a passing back, short yardage back type of situation. Even though both of those guys can do both, I would imagine that's how it would carve up, but we'll just have to see. I mean, there's so many more questions and answers, and I don't even think Mike Tomlin knows what he's gonna do when Le'Veon Bell gets back. So, both of those guys are gonna have value. I'll tell you that.
Well, it's that time of the season, my friend, but way under the radar, almost like a ghost that comes and just sits
Ooh,
into the cemetery and just floats very carefully out of vision from everybody until the right time and right opportunity. The Carolina Panthers are sneaking up on
yeah.
everyone just like a really good horror flick. They're ready to jump out and scare everybody because they did so today over the Ravens. They scared them plenty, and it took a great performance by Cam Newton. And going forward, do you see this as a tipping point to where people are really starting to think that the Carolina Panthers are some players and a team as a whole that people need to be worried about going forward?
They are. And I'll tell you, going up against Baltimore, I did not expect this from Carolina. But Cam Newton is going to win people championships this year. He has a really good schedule in the fantasy playoffs, and he's playing really, really good football. He's been, pretty good through the air, but what he brings in the ground game, he is their goal line back. He will. I mean, he's running it. Um, between 8 and 12 times a game, and he's going to get you, 50, 60, 70 yards on the ground, probably a touchdown on the ground. He is absolutely going to win some people some championships, and he likes throwing to DJ Moore. That seems to be the guy. And today, Moore had 5 for 90. But that seems like the guy that Cam is comfortable going to. He led the team. Well, he tied with Christian McCaffrey for the lead in targets. So whereas a month ago I thought it was going to be Curtis Samuel that was going to come out and start having a breakout, that's not where Cam feels most comfortable. It's DJ Moore, so he might be worth a look for fantasy teams. I think he's a wide receiver 3, 4 maybe. But Cam Newton, if there's any way, because the trade deadline for fantasy is depending on your league is the next week or two. If you can pull off a trade for Cam Newton, just keep in mind he is going to have a really good schedule in the fantasy playoffs.
Well, he's done me a lot of good. I can tell you that right now because he scared up a few wins for me, including this past weekend. So I am indebted to him once again. Just a great job he's doing so far. And back to the MVP level type deal that we've thought of him for so long now. And he'll be under the consideration not only for the NFL MVP, but at the end of the season, the Fantasy Football Pay Dirt Podcast MVP as well. So that's throwing this out there for you, my friend. I mean, you got to have those MVPs that you look back on. So
yeah, as much as I like him, and like I said, I really like his fantasy playoff schedule.
Well, hold on. I mean,
right now, for me, the front runner is definitely Mahomes.
Wow. Well, hold on. That's not, it's just still plenty of time left. Yeah. Let's not go into detail too yet, because I know Patrick Mahomes is literally one of the best fantasy producers that are out there, if not the best. So he is right now one of the leading candidates that are out there, if not the leading candidate. And he had another great game. He had another great game this weekend in Denver, which in a game that for a lot of fantasy owners really was something very special to see on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, and Sammy Watkins, would you believe I benched him? I'm in a dynasty league and I have Sammy Watkins, and he's just not there, Of course, I bench him this week, 8 receptions, 170 yards and 2 touchdowns, or 107 yards and 2 touchdowns. But Mahomes, passing for over 300 yards, 4 touchdowns, didn't do anything good in the running game. Kareem Hunt, is still putting up solid numbers. And Travis Kelce has got to be the best tight end in fantasy right now. If you have either Travis Kelce or Zach Ertz, you're talking about, really consistent numbers and really good numbers.
Not Jared Cook.
Not Jared Cook. No.
I know how much you loved his play over the years, as we've mentioned several times on this podcast. So I was just trying to throw that in under, see what you thought. Although Jared Cook's done me real well this year, but I digress.
Sure, he is the best offensive weapon on the worst offense in the NFL.
Well, there you go. See, it does me good already.
Every team has some fantasy value somewhere. Sure.
Yes, they do. Once again, it is Tyler Baker for the Fantasy Football Pay Dirt Podcast. You got to check out his podcast each and every week, and maybe some extras from time to time, each and every week on our Pop Culture Cosmos channel on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and over 30 different podcast outlets. My friend, any last thoughts on the way out before we get to the nitty-gritty on this Halloween episode of the Fantasy Football Pay Dirt Podcast?
Yeah, just look ahead in your schedule. Make sure you don't have any bye week issues coming up. If you have any questions about your lineup, you can go to the Facebook group, ask questions. We are starting to really see who these teams are. We're seeing where some teams are improving and some are just falling off the cliff. And the trade deadline is next week, next Tuesday. And so we could still see some fireworks, still see some players being traded. So that'll be worth keeping an eye on, because that could change the fantasy landscape for some teams, as it did with the Carlos Hyde trade there in Cleveland, really setting up Nick Chubb, who Nick Chubb did okay today. It wasn't eye-popping numbers, but that's going to continue to get better. So
he was playing against a defense that I think is really starting to know exactly who and where he is.
Yeah. So I was not expecting a whole lot from him this week. Pittsburgh's one of those teams that just keeps getting better. Last week we talked about the Seahawks and how they seem to get better. They won today, and surprise there, David Moore looks like he is in line to get to get some receiving work there. Now, Russell Wilson only threw the ball 17 times, but 4 of those were to Moore for 97 yards and a touchdown. Doug Baldwin was suspiciously quiet in this game. So if Doug Baldwin is not back up to health, you're looking at David Moore, and also Ed Dixon came back from injury this week. He's their tight end. Dixon got a lot of work. Remember, Seattle's had a couple of injuries at the tight end position. Ed Dixon's healthy. He only had 2 targets, but he turned those into 2 receptions, 54 yards, and a touchdown. So I'm expecting the Seahawks to get better, and I'm expecting them to win more games. And doubling up on the Detroit Lions today, 28-14, is certainly a good step in that direction. And Chris Carson, full-time runner, 25 carries, 105 yards, and touchdown. So I think we're going to see some treats moving forward in Seattle. And if I had to pick a trick offense, you know what? I think it would have to be the Jets. I think the Jets are miserably terrible. Their defense can, do some good things, but Isaiah Crowell, 13 rushes, 25 yards, and this is after Blau Powell hurt his neck and is on IR, looking like he might, Crowell might be the guy. But keep in mind that Elijah McGuire is going to be coming back at some point in the future. So, yeah, happy Halloween.
Trick or treat for me is a trick is in Buffalo still with our friend Nathan Peterman.
Nathan Peterman. Yes, you're right. You're right. There are some garbage bags out there. There are definitely some trash bag teams. We're picking on Oakland. We're picking on the Bills. We're picking on the Jets. Yeah.
Although that San Francisco and who are they playing?
Arizona
Yeah,
game.
San Francisco. That San Francisco and Arizona game. That was not what you would call a barn burner as well.
No, I do have to admit I didn't see this one. I probably am going to go back and watch it though, because I do want to see how Arizona looks under Byron Leftwich. I mean, Mike McCoy has proven himself to be a terrible offensive coordinator, a bad manager of talent, and now that Leftwich is in there, I mean, we saw what it did for Larry Fitzgerald, and Larry Fitzgerald's also healthy again, so that has a lot to do with it. So Larry Fitzgerald, Christian Kirk, and David Johnson could actually be on kind of a bad team, could actually be solid fantasy plays moving forward.
Although 18 points as a whole is not a great start, as you and I both say, a win is a win.
A win is a win, my friend.
There
Yes.
There you go. One last thing before we head on out. Just got to ask you, my friend, since the theme of Halloween and what we're doing here at the Pop Culture Cosmos is all about the horror movie genre, my friend.
Yeah.
And I got to share my thoughts on the latest Pop Culture Cosmos, which you can check out on the Pop Culture Cosmos channel. I shared my thoughts on my favorite spooky movies for Halloween. I got to hear yours, my friend. Your thoughts on what horror aspects or what parts of the horror movie genre, or even things that have scared you while watching a movie, well, actually on the screen, mind you, really have got your attention over the years when it comes to the horror movie genre.
Well, I'm going to look forward to listening to this episode, because I want to find out what yours and Josh are. I don't watch that many horror movies. Well, I don't watch any horror movies, and I rarely watch scary movies. Not because they spook me, because they just don't seem to interest me that much. But I will tell you, when I was a kid, and I'm kind of old now, so when I was a kid, do you remember the drive-in movies?
Oh yes, there's still some here and still some around.
Really?
One here in Vegas. So.
Oh, very cool, very cool. So, I remember being a little kid and going and watching Alien. Now, my mom didn't know that Alien was going to be as spooky as it was, but let me tell you, that movie scared the crap out of me when the thing jumped on the guy's face, and then and then a little while later in the movie you have an alien presenting itself out of a man's abdomen. I think that was scary and scarring at the same time. So that movie was definitely, for that time in my life, was one of the scariest. And then I know this might sound kind of dumb, but Silence of the Lambs for me was a really spooky movie.
No, actually, that is thought of now more of like into the horror genre because of the gore and the
Yeah.
suspense and the nature of it, the psychological aspects of it. Now it seems to trend more with the jump scares and the
Mhm.
psychological aspects we see in today's horror movies for the most part. Although Halloween is still, Michael Myers is still, chopping
Yeah.
it up right now at the box office. So that's always
Yeah.
something good to see right there. But no, that's not a problem. If you want to go ahead and hide under the covers, that's fine, man. That's all you. So
Well, um, I also started watching recently the Hannibal series. I can't remember what network, but they did a series called Hannibal that was about Hannibal Lecter, and visually, cinematically, it was beautiful. I mean, there was just some really cool, camera work and special effects and stuff, but it was disturbing. I would definitely consider that scary, and I don't recommend children watching it. It's very dark. It's very twisted, and it really gets into the psychology of Hannibal Lecter and how he just infects people and gets these people to do these horrific things. And in every single episode, he's making gourmet meals out of people. I mean, it's really really creepy stuff. But if you're into that sort of thing, yeah, the Hannibal series is kind of spooky. It's kind of scary.
almost as scary as watching Nathan Peterman throw to the other
Ooh.
team so many times during the day, or almost as horrifying as a John Gruden offense.
Oh, nice. Well, you know, I think Jameis Winston is going to go trick or treating as Nate Peterman this year.
Seems like that could be the case.
He had his Nate Peterman mask on today for sure.
It looked like it. It looked like it indeed. Once again, it is Tyler Baker from the Fantasy Football Patriot Podcast. My friend, it's so great to have you on the show this Halloween. Again, to everybody out there, make sure you stay in tune to our show, but also stay in tune to your leagues because it is bye weeks coming up. We're going to go
Mhm.
ahead and update you on that this weekend on the Friday show, or we'll have an extra depending on time constraints and whatnot. We're going to make sure that you are updated on what's going on with all again, another heavy bye week in the NFL. So please stay informed by sticking in tune with our show, the Fantasy Football Patriot Podcast. But as always, my friend, just so great having you on the show. Great having you a part of the program. Happy Halloween and a safe Halloween to everybody out there. And any last thoughts on the way out?
No, man, it's great being on the show. I love what you guys do. It's good to be a part of it.
Happy Halloween, my friend, and just have a safe one as well.
Thank you. You too.
And thanks again for being part of the pop culture cosmos right here on the Fantasy Football Pater Podcast.